Round 7 of the AFL season is coming your way this weekend. We're going to preview all 9 matches. We're going to look at some of the stats, some of the numbers behind all these games. Sit back, enjoy. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Welcome on in, everybody, to the All Aussie Rules Football Podcast. This is episode number 25 of season 2025. Flying through the season, we're up to round 7. We're going to be doing a preview episode of all round 7 matches coming your way this weekend. Anzac Day weekend, 9 big games, public holiday, so we'll be going through all of those. As always, we do 2 episodes a week, so make sure you hit that subscribe button or follow button wherever you're watching/listening to this one. Share it with your friends, all that stuff. Appreciate your support. We've got 2 episodes a week. We do a preview episode which comes out every Thursday and a review episode which comes out every Monday, so check them out. We're kind of in a process of adjusting the exact way we do our episodes. We're focusing more on the stats that nobody else looks at, so that is the plan going forward for the channel. In the podcast at least. We do other videos as well. There's also plenty of social media content going out every day on Instagram, on TikTok, on Twitter. So go check it all out everywhere. All Aussie Rules, wherever you look. So yeah, that's that. Let's jump into football. No point on wasting time. Let's see what we've got coming up this weekend. And we lead off on Thursday night with Melbourne v Richmond at the MCG. Obviously, the big news from this one is Noah Balta back out of the team this week. His curfew does not allow him to play night games or interstate games for the next 3 months, basically. So, no Noah Balta. He was really good last week for the Tigers against Gold Coast. So that's probably the big news of the day. It's 17th on the ladder versus 15th on the ladder. Somehow Richmond are above Melbourne, who won their first game on the weekend. Richmond obviously have 2 wins this season. If you check out on the screen, if you're not looking, we have an ELO rating. So that's the rating system that we use for every team. But it rates every game. They move up and down. It goes across a couple of years. That's where they currently sit. So Melbourne are a 14.06. Richmond are a 13.13 for the first time in a while. They're not the lowest ranked team. They're up to 16th in terms of that. And I think Melbourne might be 15th, if off the top of my head. We'll get to them at the end of the episode. But that's their rating. Clearly puts Melbourne as the predicted winner. So these percentages go from these ELO ratings. Nothing more, nothing less. Does account for home ground advantage though as well. Melbourne are going into this reasonably comfortable favourites in most markets and also in my percentages, 63% as I said. There's what to make of this game. I don't think it's going to be the most exciting Thursday night football game we're going to get this year for obvious reasons. One team has only won 1 game, which was last week, and the other team's won 2, which one of them was last week. So they are both coming off wins, which is probably a little bit surprising in the long run. I don't know how many people probably expected them to both be coming off wins. They both played pretty good football last weekend, though. If we're to look at scoring for both teams, obviously neither of them are the highest scoring teams. Looking across the board where they do score from, both teams pretty average from the kick in all honesty. Stoppage work, Richmond once again pretty average at scoring from stoppages, so don't expect too much from either team. I think in that area it's going to be a turnover game. I think if we look at the numbers, they're not fantastic again at scoring from turnovers, but that's kind of the only source that both these two teams have really been consistent at this year. Transitioning from the defensive half, both teams are right down the bottom level, but once again, they don't score as much as most other teams, so they probably should be down there. And from the forward half, it's a similar story to of the. In fact, they are the second and third lowest teams at scoring from the forward half. And from the centre bounce is pretty similar story, in all honesty. Melbourne, slightly better than Richmond, but across the board, they're not high-scoring teams, either of them. So I wouldn't expect too much scoring from this match. But at the same time, maybe that's what this will open this game up to be high-scoring. Yeah, who knows though? To be completely honest, both teams kind of defend the centre bounce okay. They both concede a lot more than they would like from the forward half. That comes a lot from the turnover game. They both concede very high numbers in turnover game. So the game kind of equates to just an evenly matched scoring and flow of the game, I think. And in all honesty, it probably doesn't favour either of them. You just got to probably think that Melbourne have maybe the higher ceiling than Richmond, although for this year at least, not long term. Long term, Richmond look like they will be pretty good, but yeah, that's how I see it. The teams have been announced for this one. Stephen May's coming back in, as is Bailey Fritsch after being dropped last week, and Judd McPhee coming back in, going out of Blake Howes, Daniel Turner and Jake Melksham. For Richmond, Ryan Mansell and Campbell Gray coming in for his debut. Out, as we said, Noah Bolter and Samson Ryan. Richmond, once again, going to be relying on their senior players, I guess. Noyan Curvis. Taranto was really good last week. Obviously, Vlosten's been really good this season, so their senior players will be very important. They've got some really good young players that play a key role for them each week, but I don't think they can rely on them as much as they need to on the more senior players. Meanwhile, Melbourne, they've still got a really good team. Their backline's still very strong. It's just a matter of their midfield probably hasn't been living up to the expectations of a midfield that's got Petrarca, Max Gawn, and and Clayton Oliver. Sorry. So that's, if their midfield gets on top, makes it easier for their backline, that will be huge. Their forward line has been really inconsistent this season. They did score quite highly last week, but a lot of them were from midfield. Cozzy Pickett obviously kicked 5 goals from his 24 touches. Yeah. Richmond, I can see winning it just due to the fact that they will, if they can manage to bring a game of full pressure, they will be in this game. But the long and the short of it, I think, is Melbourne should be too strong. They've had the wood over them over the last couple of years. They met once last year. Melbourne won it by 43 points. 2023, they met a couple times, including this match. They play this match every year, the night before Anzac Day, or they have for the last couple of years at least, and they won that one as well. So it's pretty much says Melbourne should win this, but at the same time, I wouldn't do it confidently, just because they haven't been great this year. But I do expect to see their midfield start to lift. Max Gawn looks like he's getting back into some sort of form. So yeah, that's how I see the Anzac Day Eve game. We jump into the first of 2 games on Anzac Day. It's Friday afternoon. It's the traditional one. It's Collingwood Essendon, the MCG. Collingwood coming off 5 wins in a row. The Bombers coming off 3 wins in a row. Not too often you have 2 informed teams. I mean, inform is relative, I guess. You can only be in form against who you're playing, and I mean, the Bombers haven't had the toughest run the last couple of weeks, but they've won 3 in a row, so things are certainly looking okay for them. High disposal team, Essendon. Collingwood not so much, so it'll be interesting to see how that plays out in this one. Collingwood obviously haven't had perhaps the easiest run. They've obviously last 2 weeks have played both of last year's grand finalists and beat them both in the end quite comfortably. I think if you look at the rating system, Collingwood 1613, Essendon 1479, 1500 is AFL average for this system. So Essendon just slightly below that average, whereas Collingwood are quite comfortably above that average. In fact, Collingwood have moved up into a second in that system for the first time in basically 12 months. Obviously, when they won the premiership, they were on top. They dropped pretty quickly out of top spot last year, losing their first few. But they're moving their way back up. 5 wins in a row, just not to start the season. They obviously lost week 1. But huge last 5 weeks they've had. History of these two teams, obviously they play Anzac Day every year. If we look at last year, Anzac Day was a draw. I think most people will remember that. Jamie Elliott's mark, Langford missing the goal to win. Both teams probably left that game thinking they had every opportunity to win it. In the end, ended up a draw. Probably the right result, in my opinion. They met again later on in the year in round 17, and the Bombers won it by 2 goals. They were quite comfortably up early in the last quarter from memory. They were about 5 goals clear. Collingwood came home late, but Bombers were definitely the better team that day. 2023, they met twice, once in round 24, which Collingwood won by 70 points. Essendon's season was over by that point. Collingwood obviously were gearing up for a finals run that ended up with them winning the premiership. They met on Anzac Day as well, obviously, earlier in the year. And Collingwood won that one by a couple goals after trailing quite comfortably late in the third quarter. They absolutely turned it on in that final quarter and ran over the top of the Bombers. So, not huge dominance over the last couple of years either way. Obviously, 2 wins Collingwood, a draw, and 1 win Essendon over the last 2 years. Collingwood expected, in most eyes, I think, to probably be too good here. They've obviously won 5 in a row. They're in some pretty good form. But I certainly wouldn't write the Bombers off. News for this one, obviously, the ruck situation in Bomberland is interesting. They've lost their 2 first ruckmans that they've used this year in Nick Bryan and Sammy Draper. They're both out for basically the season, or for the season, which brings in Goldie. They're lucky that they have that depth in their ruck lineup. Unlike pretty much almost every other team, they do have 3 ruckmen that are capable. So I think he'll be fine to come in. He wasn't spectacular last year when he was playing, but he's definitely going to have more opportunity this year, so we'll see how that plays out for him. Collingwood side of the fence, Darcy Moore's going out with an ear issue that's causing vertigo, which means they have a new captain, and that's going to be Nick Dacos captaining the team for the first time. Obviously one of their 2 vice captains, so it was either him or Maynard that was going to get that call up for skipper, really. They've gone with Dacos. We'll see how that plays out, but you'd imagine it will just fire him up even more to play well, is my prediction on that. Dan Houston comes back in this week as well for the Pies from his suspension, so some big ins, and look, you'd have to think that Collingwood will be too strong. I'm not going to confidently say that they will win it. It's Anzac Day. Both teams always step up on Anzac Day and play, no matter what form they're in, they always play better, both teams. So I expect it to be a tight game, a good game of football to watch, and it will probably go down to the wire. But I think Collingwood should be too strong. We move into the game after that one. It's on Friday night, 8:10 kickoff in Australian Eastern Time, so 6:10 kickoff over in Perth. It's Fremantle Adelaide at Optus Stadium. Big game for both teams, but especially for Fremantle. Their season is not on the line, but it's threatening to fall away from them very quickly if they don't start to put together some better form. in all honesty, it hasn't been a great start. They're going to go into this game as favourites in the markets, slight favourites in the markets. As you can see, my rating system does have them above Adelaide. Adelaide obviously had a really low starting point to this season because of last year. They only won however many games they won, but they finished 15th on the ladder, whereas Fremantle were 10th. So Fremantle were above them a long way. Adelaide have had a good start to this year, but those couple losses that they had in a row, one against Gold Coast and then they lost against Geelong 2 weeks ago, just lowered their rating a little bit. They're 4-2 going into this game, 5th on the ladder though. They arrested that poor form, or couple losses at least, last week with a really brave win, I'd say, over GWS in Adelaide. It was a very wet game. Wasn't the prettiest game to watch, but they just kept going and they got over the line. It was a really strong performance. Whereas Fremantle started the season poorly, lost their first couple, fought their way back into the season with 3 wins in a row, beating West Coast, the Bulldogs, and then Richmond. So Bulldogs are going well, but the other two, maybe not so much. But really poor loss last week to Melbourne. In Melbourne, granted, but still, they need to be winning those ones, you'd think, if they're going to give a real shake to this season. But they get a chance to erase that memory straight away here with a win over Adelaide on Anzac Day night. They met round 3 last year, so it's been a while. They only have played each other once each year the last couple, and both times that's been really early in the season. So round 3 last year, Freo won it over there at Optus Stadium by 35 points, and then 2 years ago they met in Adelaide, and Adelaide won that one by 39 points. So that tells you, I don't know what it tells you, but it does tell you something. Not whoever's, well, I mean, it's not much of a selection pool, I guess, but both teams won at home. And this year's teams are probably different than those two. Fremantle were probably the better team both of those seasons, whereas this year you got to think that Adelaide are probably at the moment looking like the better team. Both teams have very strong forward lines, but Adelaide's is in a lot better form than Fremantle's. Fremantle's forward line did look good against Richmond for a quarter and a half, but hasn't been overly consistent. Their midfield, I think, has been a little bit down on their best, and at the moment Adelaide's midfield has been really good. The Adelaide backline maybe is a little vulnerable at times, whereas the Fremantle backline isn't too bad and should be able to handle. I mean, it is a really strong Adelaide forward line, but they should be competitive enough, I think, in that area. So across the ground, it kind of looks like it's going to be a game of, does Fremantle's midfield perform as good as they can, especially in that clearance game, and can their forward line convert those opportunities into scores? Because if they don't, Adelaide will make them pay. Adelaide like a free-flowing game. They like a high-scoring game. I know last week wasn't that way, but I would expect to see the Crows really try and open this game up as much as they can. And Fremantle, will they be able to assert their dominance in the midfield and make use of those opportunities up forward? That's probably all I have on this game, I think. Worth noting, Murphy Reid from Fremantle was nominated for the Rising Star this week. We don't really talk about those sort of things too often on the podcast, but if you're interested, go head over to my Instagram at All Aussie Rules. Each week I have been posting a rookie update, a Rising Star update, I should say. So everyone that's eligible for the Rising Star, and we rank them in order of their ratings so far this year, and also do a weekly best players as well. So go check that out. Murphy Reid is in the top. I think he's second highest rated player so far this season that's eligible for that Rising Star honour. Moving on to Saturday football, and it's Marvel Stadium, and it's an interesting one. It's St Kilda Brisbane. Make of this game what you will, but it's going to be an interesting one. Both teams above that 1500 mark. St Kilda just 1506. Brisbane at a 1657. Suffered their first loss last weekend against Collingwood at the Gabba. The reason we think this is an interesting one is, St Kilda do play Marvel Stadium better than they play any other ground, but they were atrocious last week. Let's be honest, they were not at all any good against the Bulldogs. They're sitting 12th on the ladder. They're 3-3, whereas Brisbane suffered their first loss last week. They're 5-1, sitting second on the ladder. St Kilda started all right this season. They lost week 1 against Adelaide, but you forget that. They then beat Geelong, Richmond, Port Adelaide in Adelaide. But then their last 2 weeks, they've been smacked by GWS in Gather Round, and then lost to the Bulldogs by I was going to say a massive margin. I don't know what words I was looking for, but yeah, a massive margin. They were never outside of the first 5 to 6 minutes. They weren't in that game. They just didn't even look like they were playing the same game of football. These two teams met at Marvel Stadium not that long ago, round 21 last year. So St Kilda have only played 8 or 9 games since that point, and that day Brisbane won by 85 points at Marvel Stadium. So that's not a great sign for St Kilda here. You go back, they met at the Gabba earlier in the year in a high-scoring shootout. Brisbane won that one by 20 points. 2023, they met in round 24. Brisbane won it by 12 points. So the history is saying a lot towards Brisbane here. St Kilda do tend to play Marvel all right, but they played it atrocious last week, so I'm not confident in them at all in that facet of the game. Obviously, the rating system has Brisbane comfortably in front. Brisbane are going to be fired up to bounce back. Will St Kilda also be fired up to bounce back after a really poor display last week? I don't know. You tell me. I will be tipping Brisbane. I just could not tip St Kilda based on what we saw last weekend. And Brisbane have been okay at Marvel over the recent couple years. I don't have their full history in front of me there, but I know that over the last 2 years, they obviously smacked St Kilda. They did beat Collingwood there in Collingwood's premiership year. So they do have a decent history at Marvel. I would be confident enough that Brisbane should be too strong here for St Kilda. Moving on to the next game, it's the evening game, so like the 4:40-ish kickoff, I think, is the time. 4:15 Australian Eastern Time, so 3:45 Adelaide time. Definitely not looking like game of the round, but you just never know. Port Adelaide, North Melbourne, Adelaide Oval. Rating system obviously has Port Adelaide massively in front here, 1586. North Melbourne at 1303. So Port Adelaide will go in heavy favourites in the markets and in my rating system as well. It's hard to see a world where North Melbourne can bounce back to be competitive in this, but Port Adelaide have been very up and down so far this year. So Port Adelaide are 3-3, sitting 10th on the ladder. They lost week 1. They then bounced back with a big win over Richmond. They were then really poor for 2 weeks against Essendon and St Kilda before. The last 2 weeks they've been really good. They beat Hawthorn in Gather Round over in Adelaide, and then they beat Sydney at the SCG last week. Granted, most of the numbers suggest Sydney were better, just wasted a lot of opportunities, whereas Port Adelaide did not waste their opportunities. But that's what you got to do in football, especially these days. Now more than ever, it is very important to kick straight in front of goal, because too many teams are losing matches because they cannot kick straight. Meanwhile, over the other side of the fence, North Melbourne looked really good the first, I want to say, 3 weeks. Round 1 against the Bulldogs, they were solid. Round 2, they smacked Melbourne, looked really good. But since then, they were okay against Adelaide in round 3. They stayed in the game. They lost it by like 30, 40 points. But they were competitive enough. You were happy with the performance. Since then, though, the last 3 weeks have been really, really disappointing. They got smacked by Sydney, especially in the second half. They were competitive for almost 3 full quarters against Gold Coast and then ended up losing by 52 points after just completely falling apart late in that game. And then sort of similar against Carlton. They weren't as competitive in that one at any point, but they weren't too bad for the first half. They were only 20 points down, but they got absolutely demolished in that second half. Travelling over to Adelaide for the third time this year, sorry. They've obviously played Adelaide over there. They played Gold Coast and Gather Round, and now they're going over again for Port Adelaide. It's hard to see a world where they're going to be competitive in this, but you just never know, I guess. Last 3 years, they've only met each other once. All 3 times have been North Melbourne home games, typically mid-season game, and Port Adelaide have smacked them in all 3. 2022, it was a 69-point win to Port Adelaide. 2023, it was a 70-point win to Port Adelaide. And in 2024, it was a 59-point win to Port Adelaide. So now that Port get the home game, you have to think this is a danger signs for North Melbourne. How do North Melbourne win this? They have to show something. And I don't know what that is, because we just don't see enough of it. They attack pretty well, in all honesty. They can score goals reasonably quickly. You look at their average score. It's not fantastic, but it's probably slightly up on last year. Their problem is how many points they're conceding. Over the last 4 weeks, they've conceded 114, 117, 141 and 153. That is a concern. It's kind of similar to where they were at this point last year. I think for a long chunk of the season, they were averaging well over 110 points a game against, and in all honesty, it looks like that's going to happen again. You take out that really strange result against Melbourne, where they only conceded 66. They are averaging a lot of points against them this year. And Port Adelaide can score. There's no doubt about it. They scored 121 against a really good Hawthorn team. They scored 140 against Richmond over in Adelaide. So if Port Adelaide have their kicking boots on, this could be a really high-scoring game for them. And yeah, I just don't see a world where Kangaroos can keep up with them offensively. Even though North do kick straight usually, pretty much every week they will kick more goals than behinds, but they just don't create enough opportunities, and I can't see a world where that changes this week. They've been pretty good in the clearance game, but just outside of that, they haven't been great at all. Saturday night football is potentially game of the round. Maybe I will call this one game of the round. It's hard to go against the Collingwood-Essendon game just because of the history and whatnot, but I think this is actually game of the round here. Saturday night, Manuka Oval, the nation's capital, gets the best of the week, and it's GWS Bulldogs. And tune into this one. If you're not doing anything, there's no better reason to turn on the football on a Saturday night. 2 teams that are very much right there or thereabouts, but just had really strange seasons so far. Going at each other should be interesting. GWS 4-2 for the season, sitting 4th on the ladder. Bulldogs 3-3 for the season, sitting 8th on the ladder. And how good was it to see Bont back last week? He was insanely good. If you've been around this channel for a while, you will know. But if you're not, haven't been, if you're new, Bont is my number 1 player in the competition right now. He has been for the last couple years, and boy did he live up to that on the weekend. He was fantastic against St Kilda. His second quarter was absurd. His whole match was really good. For someone that hasn't played this season, it was absolutely crazy. If we jump into this game, though, where do both teams sit? I mean, the ELO ratings have them very similar. GWS just ahead, chuck in the home ground advantage, and they do come out as a 58% chance of winning this one. the markets also have GWS at a pretty similar point to that. Like, they're expected to win. The history of these two teams, though, certainly last year, goes the favour of Bulldogs. They met twice last year. One was a sloppy, wet game up in Sydney, I think, from memory, and Bulldogs won it kicking 8 goals 22. Yes, you heard right, 8 goals 22. They won that one by 27 points. They met later on in the year, which was a Bulldogs home game. It was the last game of the year. If I remember correctly, it was in Ballarat, maybe, and the Doggies won that one by 37 points, so they won both their meetings last year. They met in round 20 of season 2023, and the Giants won that one by 5 points. But the Dogs play well against GWS. They're in form. They do lose Sam Darcy for the next 3 months, which is shattering for Darcy, and it's also shattering for Bulldogs. He had been their shining light with no Bont out there. They now need to find other scoring avenues. We'll probably see that be Bont at quite big periods of not just this week, but over the next, maybe for the rest of the season. Especially with their midfield depth, I reckon it will allow them to rest him forward a lot more. I mean, they did it a few times last year and teams questioned it, but he's just so good that you just want him in the game all the time. But they do have really good midfield depth between Libba, Ed Richards, Riley Sanders, Treloar to come back at some point, and I'm probably missing someone as well. Kennedy's in there now as well. They just have such good midfield depth that I think it will really allow them to use Bont as that attacking forward at times. He doesn't have to stay at full forward, but like a roaming half forward could be dangerous as well. He's a hard matchup wherever he is on the ground, so look for that to be an interesting move that the Doggies could throw out at us. Because they are going to have to find goals. There's no doubt about it. Sam Darcy was their get out of jail free card this year so far. He'd been outstanding. Where are these two teams at the moment this season? GWS obviously started really well. They won their first 2 games. They lost down in a windy Tassie game against Hawthorn by 12 points. Then they beat Eagles St Kilda, who understandably aren't going that well. And then in a wet game in Adelaide Oval last week, they went down by 18 points in a really low-scoring game. They kicked 4 goals 10. So it's a bit of a topsy-turvy start to the season. It's an interesting start to their season. But it's one that they're in an okay spot without being fantastically positioned. Meanwhile, the other side of the fence over at the Bulldog land, they obviously won their first game against North Melbourne. Struggled the next few weeks in some close games. Lost by 6 points to Collingwood. They did manage to get over Carlton by 8 points. Lost to 16 points to Fremantle over in the West, so that's a complete forgive. Gather round was against Brisbane and they lost that by 30 points. 21 points. Sorry. But not a bad performance against last year's premiers. And then, obviously, last week was where they really stamped their spot on the season. Bonk came back and they won by like 70-odd points against the Saints and absolutely demolished them in every facet of that game. From about the 5-minute mark, they just had the ball up their end. They controlled everything in that game. They dominated clearances. They dominated inside 50s. They dominated everything they needed to. St Kilda just had nowhere to go at any point, and the Bulldogs just thrashed them. So a really good sign there for the Doggies, and one that just makes this tip a little bit harder to get, I think, because Bulldogs obviously last year beat GWS twice. Chuck in the fact that they're in really good form, whereas GWS are coming off their worst performance of the season. But that means the Giants will be keen to bounce back. I haven't heard whether Jesse Hogan's back or not. He obviously missed last week. He's crucial for this GWS team. I've said it all of last year, well, maybe not all of last year, but a big chunk of last year, and so far this year. He's their get out of jail free card, because when he's not there, they don't have that option of knowing that they can kick to a spot, and at worst, it's going to be 50-50. He never loses those one-on-ones. He wins them 50% of the time, and the rest of the time, it goes to ground. And that's where Toby Green goes to work. That's where Brent Daniels or Toby Bedford or whoever else is in that forward line can go to work. But it's all on the back of the fact that they can kick it in any fashion, and Jesse Hogan will compete and will not lose that one-on-one contest. And when he's not there, they don't have that option, and it really shows. Their forward line just looks nowhere near as good outside of opening round against Collingwood, but that was just flat-out ball movement against Collingwood that day that just destroyed them. And they got over the back, and there weren't one-on-one contests in that forward line. So, I think that's the crucial one. If Jesse Hogan's playing or not, I probably should have looked into it more, whether he would be back or not. I don't know, but that's where I see that game. We'll jump into Sunday football. The first game on Sunday afternoon is up on the Gold Coast. It's the Suns v the Swans. This will be the early starting game. Thankfully, we don't have any night games this week on Sunday, but we do have Gold Coast Sydney. Gold Coast ELO is definitely rising. They're up to a 15.05, although it did drop last week with a loss to Richmond. Sydney's is dropping quite a lot this year so far. Obviously, they're not having the most spectacular start to the year, but the Suns are going to go in favourites. They obviously have a really good record up on the Gold Coast as it is, so that will be interesting. They did meet last year just the once, which was in Sydney, and the Swans won it by 53 points, so quite comfortably. The year before they met in Sydney as well, and they won by 24 points. So Sydney do have the record. This will be the first time, though, in a while that they've played each other on the Gold Coast. The win percentage says Sydney on top. The market has Gold Coast on top quite comfortably, and that's because Sydney's season has not got going yet. They lost their first two games of the year. Obviously, opening round, against Hawthorn they lost. Followed that up with a 4-point loss to Brisbane at home. They then got 3-point win against Fremantle over in the... over in the West. What I was going to say was correct. They then smacked the Kangaroos at Marvel Stadium, which was a really good result for them, before they went to Gather Round, got beaten by Collingwood. I won't say super convincingly, but reasonably comfortably enough by 31 points. And then last week was a really disappointing performance where they just couldn't kick a goal. They lost it by 8 points to Port Adelaide. So their season really not looking great at the moment, but there's plenty of time to turn that around. They had 2 wins, 4 losses after 6 matches. 14th on the ladder. Meanwhile, Gold Coast Suns obviously started the season fantastically. They won their first 4 games. Everything was looking great for them. They were expected to be really good throughout. All things flying. In that time, they'd only played one home game, 2 away games plus a neutral game against the Kangaroos. They went up against Richmond, though, last week and went down to them. So a little bit of a wake-up call. I don't think it's too concerning for them, but just something to note, I guess, that, maybe they just need to focus a little bit better through games. But the fact that they've only had 1 home game through 5 matches sets their season up really well, because they already have 4 wins and they still have like 10 home games to go throughout the rest of the year. So plenty of opportunities to continually get more wins, which will be huge for them. And in all honesty, they should win this. They're in the better form, even with last week's performance. Their running back line is really good, as is Sydney's, to be fair. They've shown some really good additions to their team. I think Sydney's midfield is still kind of struggling. Is that because Errol Goulden's not there? Probably a big key reason to that. Until Errol gets back, will they be able to to really reach the heights of the midfield. They still have plenty of good players in there, but for some reason, whatever reason, they can't get all of them playing well at the same time. Like even Heaney and Chad Warner. Basically, one of them plays okay, the other one doesn't. And then, yeah, that's pretty much what it's been. They haven't been able to get that consistency from both of them yet. So there's a lot of room for improvement for Sydney. Will it come against Gold Coast? Maybe. Gold Coast obviously really strong across the ground. Their midfield's really strong. Their forward line's looking good. King especially. And they do have a really good back line. Sam Collins is one of the best fullbacks. Mac Andrew has a lot of potential at both ends of the ground. So I think comfortably enough, I'm going to suggest that Gold Coast will do pretty well in this game. Moving on to the next one, it's Carlton Geelong at the MCG. Sunday afternoon football, and at the start of the season this probably looked like it was going to be game of the round. Carlton have not suggested that this will be, but they are coming in on a 2-game winning streak, so you just never know, do you? Their ratings, obviously Carlton lost their first 4 games this year, so their rating dropped quite a bit, and both of their wins have been against low teams, so it doesn't jump up as quickly as it would if they had beaten 2 top teams. Meanwhile, Geelong, they finished top 4 last year. They've started the season pretty consistently. They did lose 2 games there, but overall they look pretty good. So Carlton sitting 13th on the ladder, 2 wins, 4 losses. Lost their first 4 matches of the year. They were pretty close in all of them, in all honesty. They didn't have a bad performance outside of losing to Richmond, I guess. But Richmond are showing okay signs. But they were 20 points to Hawthorn, 8 points to the Bulldogs, 17 points to Collingwood. Aren't terrible results, but they're all losses. They've turned it around the last 2 weeks. 71-point win over West Coast. 82-point win against Carlton. Against North Melbourne. So things are looking up, but I'm not going to tip them until we see them beat somebody that is playing good football. And West Coast and North Melbourne right now are the 2 teams playing the worst football in the competition. I think that's safe to say. I'm confident in saying that. Arguably Melbourne could be down there with them as well, but Melbourne are kind of slowly turning their season around, whereas North Melbourne are falling away. So that's where they're at. Geelong are 6th on the ladder, 4 wins, 2 losses. Outstanding first week against Fremantle. Then showed some little hiccups, losing to St Kilda round 2, Brisbane round 3. Both close games, 7 points to St Kilda, 9 points to Brisbane. And then they've turned that right around. They beat Melbourne by 39 points, which, I mean, they should be beating Melbourne. Beat Adelaide by 19 points in gather round, which was a really big performance after being about 7 goals down at one point. And then they went up against Hawthorn and beat them by 7 points on Easter Monday. It tells you that they might be back. It's going to be, I think, a close-ish game. Based on what we've seen this year, Geelong should be too good. But the thing is, also, you can just never rule out Carlton because they do have that dominant midfield. They have some really good forwards, and their backline's strong. Wiedering has a little bit of an injury cloud on him, I think, but I think he'll still play. The history of these 2 teams is an interesting one, probably the most interesting one, because when we go into it, they met round 2, 2023. Carlton won that one by 8 points. Geelong had a rough 2023 season. They didn't play finals. 2024, they met early in the season, round 7. And Geelong won it by 13 points in a really high-scoring game. Carlton wasted a lot of opportunities early in that game. I still think Geelong were the better team, but Carlton definitely wasted opportunities that day. And then they met again in round 15, and this is the game where we watched it, and it was like, lock Carlton in for a top 4 spot, lock them in for a home qualifying final, because they were dominant. They beat Geelong by 63 points in an absolute bloodbath. The De Koning brothers went at each other in the ruck, and obviously we know who won because Carlton won the game. It was a devastating win. But then from that point on, Carlton basically didn't win another game. I think they only won one more for the year, maybe two, for the rest of the season. And Geelong, on the reverse, turned it right around and pretty much didn't lose many more. Made it all the way to a prelim. So it just shows you that like one result doesn't mean that much. But that game, 63-point win to Carlton, was scintillating victory. So they're going to be in this. They're going to have every opportunity. I won't be tipping them until we see them beat somebody of resemblance, but I would not be shocked. It would not shock me in the slightest to see Carlton competitive and even maybe winning this game. We move on to the final game of the round, and it's arguably the worst. There's two bad ones, let's be honest. Port Adelaide, North Melbourne, and Hawthorn, West Coast. This one at Marvel Stadium, Sunday evening game. Hawthorn obviously have a much higher rating than West Coast, who have dropped down to the lowest rating in the competition as of this week. What can we do to amp this game up? I don't know if there's anything. This will be, well, should be at least, a bloodbath. Last time they met was round 16. It was over in the West, and Hawthorn won it by 61 points. You go back to 2023 where Hawthorn weren't that great. They met down in Tassie. Hawthorn won it by 116 points. The year before, round 18, 2022, Hawthorn won it by 25 points. History says Hawthorn win it. It's in Melbourne. West Coast are playing atrocious. Hawthorn aren't. It's surely a free tip for you. Hawthorn season, they're 7th on the ladder. They're 4-2. They have lost their last two, but one of them was Port Adelaide in Adelaide, so you kind of do forgive that, even though they shouldn't have been 80 points down at one point. And then obviously Geelong on Easter Monday is always a tough ask, and they were competitive. They only lost by 7 points, so yeah, you kind of just forget about those two, and they get the perfect opportunity to turn that form right around here. Meanwhile, West Coast haven't won a game yet, and in all honesty, haven't really looked that close. The closest they've got was last week, granted. They only lost by 2 points to the Bombers at home. They did kick away early in that game. They were still 4 goals up with 6 minutes to go in the third quarter, but the Bombers were too strong late. And if the Eagles can't win that, then I don't think they're going to get too many opportunities to win games this year. If they can't win that one, it does concern me a little bit. But end of the day, that's football. Hawthorn should be too strong. I don't think we need to talk about this game for too long, because I just don't see a world where the Eagles can be competitive. They don't play Marvel Stadium that well. I mean, they don't play a huge amount of games there, but they don't play it that well when they do. So, granted, Hawthorn probably don't play spectacularly well there either, but it's just not a match that I can see West Coast being competitive. So I'll be confidently tipping Hawthorn in that one. So that's all 9 matches for the weekend. Now we'll have a look at the team ratings. I've kind of gone away from power rankings. I still do them on the side, but I'm not publishing them on here. I'm going with the team ratings. I think this is a better system. It's a number system and not biased by my opinions on teams, if you get what I mean. So this is how they sit after round 6. Brisbane remain at number 1. However, their lead is shrinking a little bit. They were further ahead going into last week. Collingwood moved from 3rd to 2nd. Geelong jumped from 6th up to 3rd. So big move from the Cats with their win over Hawthorn. Hawthorn dropped from 2nd to 4th with their loss to Geelong, but right behind Geelong, really close there. Talking of close, Port Adelaide are right behind them. They've gone from 7th up to 5th and really moving into a position where it's like, well, maybe they're a chance to be competitive this year. Obviously, they finished 2nd on the ladder last year and lost in a prelim, so their rating was pretty high to start with, and even though it did suffer a couple bad losses early in the season, they're still going okay at the moment, and they've got a couple big wins the last 2 weeks against Hawthorn and Sydney, who were both teams above them at the time. Obviously, they're now above Sydney. GWS dropped a couple spots. They went from 4th to 6th. Sydney also dropped 2 spots. They go from 5th to 7th. Bulldogs move into the 8th from 9th spot into 8th. Fremantle do the reverse and go from 8th to 9th. This is the weird one that people won't understand, but this is numbers for you, I guess. St Kilda get absolutely thrashed, but move up a spot to 10th spot, and that's because they were slightly behind Gold Coast and now they're slightly ahead, and that's because Gold Coast lost to Richmond. Losing to teams below you will hurt your score more, and Gold Coast go from 10 to 11. Adelaide somehow don't make enough ground because they had lost a couple in a row to jump them, but they move into 12th and now right in range of jumping at least a couple teams this week if they can get a win, especially a win over Fremantle would jump them probably above Freo and probably St Kilda and maybe Gold Coast depending on those results. The Bombers sit 13th and were 13th, so no change there, but still solid enough in that spot. Carlton 14th, they were there before. Melbourne 15th, they do move up a little bit. They were down in the 1300s, so they're back up into the 1400s, but still a long way away from Carlton, who's in 14th. And speaking of a long gap, it's a big gap down to 16th, which is Richmond, who jumped 2 spots thanks to their win over the Gold Coast Suns. North Melbourne sitting 17th, and right behind them in 18th spot is the Eagles. So that's the rating system. If you want to know more about it, feel free to touch base, whether you do that in my DMs on Instagram or Twitter or post it in the comments here. But that's the rating system. We did a predicted ladder, expected wins video that went on the YouTube channel this week. So go check that out based on this system. That is on the YouTube. So go check that out. We'll jump into my tips for this week, and that is all that we have left, I think. Last week was atrocious for us. It was atrocious for many people, but it was probably worse for us in terms of actual tips. I did suggest it was going to be a torturous week, and there was just so many games that I was not confident in, and it kind of eventuated that way. But we bounced back this week. We got 9 matches. Let's go for 9 for 9. Melbourne, I've got by 21 points over Richmond. I think they should be too good. It doesn't mean they will be, but I just think they should be too good in that one. Collingwood by 18 over Essendon. Once again, Collingwood are on paper and on ceiling-wise the better team, but Essendon will be up for this, so don't write them off completely. Fremantle by 11 points over Adelaide, just because it's in Freo. But this is a really good chance for Adelaide to make a statement game. So watch for them. I think they'll be in the game for many parts of this if they're not winning it. Brisbane should be too good for St Kilda. I can't tip St Kilda based on what we saw last weekend. Got them by 20. It could be more though. Port Adelaide should be way too good for North Melbourne based on what we've seen this year, but there's always that possibility that the bad Port Adelaide will show up. But I've got them by 50. I've got GWS v Bulldogs. I'm going Bulldogs just because of the history. Last year, Bulldogs got them twice. Bulldogs were really good last week. I think GWS will come out firing and want to win this one, but something tells me doggies. So I've got them by 4 points. Gold Coast by 17 over the Swans. Just on form. I know Gold Coast lost last week, but consistency over this year so far, Gold Coast. And if they want to be competitive and want to play their first final series, these are the games they have to win. I've got Geelong to beat Carlton by 12 points. I think it will be close. I'm not tipping Carlton until I see them beat someone good. Hawthorn should be way too good for West Coast. I've got them by 60, but in all honesty, it wouldn't surprise me to see this one being over 100 points. Hawthorn will be out for blood after 2 losses in a row. So expect them to turn up and absolutely put in their A game. Ginnivan will be back in. Him and Watson will probably kick 10 between them. So that is a wrap on episode 25 of season 2025. That's round 7. All 9 matches coming your way. Don't forget to follow all the social medias. There's content going out every day, during games, after games, all of that stuff. Check out the podcast. Well, you're on the podcast, but make sure you follow along, like this video, comment, give it a rating, all those things. Whether you're on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts, make sure you follow along, because I appreciate you being here. Share it with your friends. And if you're not on the YouTube, head over there, give that one a follow as well. We're trying to get those numbers up, and also there's plenty of other videos that get released throughout the year, so go check them all out. All Aussie Rules everywhere. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Jay. This has been episode 25. I'll catch you on the next one.